Hello and welcome to Educated STEM. I'm Kate, the founder of Educated STEM, and today we are continuing the series with Dr. Mahadio Sukai. Please go back and watch the first half of the series where we talked about his experiences being a low vision scientist, and now we're doing a deep dive into DEI, or IDEA as he prefers to say it. And apparently we're doing a slightly bonus episode. I rather naively made a comment that doing these accommodations or making accommodations for people should be relatively easy. They need them. They're great at their job. You give them the accommodation. But apparently it isn't as easy as that. I am showing my naivety. So we're going to hand it over to Mahadio, and he's going to explain why it is so challenging for these people to get accommodations. Mahadio.
So have you ever heard of Little Blue Truck, Kate?
Oh, the children's story?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you ever read Time for School, Little Blue Truck?
I don't believe I have. I have the Christmas one where they have the Christmas trees.
Okay. So I recommend you get Time for School, Little Blue Truck, and I actually recommend that everyone who's listening to this get Time for School, Little Blue Truck, irrespective of whether you have children or not. And I will tell you why. The story in the Little Blue Truck series revolves around a little blue pickup truck called Little Blue, right? And his good friend Toad, and these two go driving around country roads as one does, and they encounter all sorts of adventures. And so in Time for School, Little Blue Truck and good friend Toad are driving along one morning, and they come across a school bus who is big and shiny and yellow and has lots of windows and has benches inside for the little animals to sit on so they can go to school. And inside the school bus are, of course, many, many little animals of Little Blue's acquaintance. And Little Blue says to the school bus, "You have a really cool job. I want to be a school bus just like you." And the school bus says, "But you're not yellow, and you're not big, and you're not shiny, and you don't have lots of benches and lots of windows, so I don't possibly see how you can be a school bus." Little Blue goes along his way with Toad, and lo and behold, they encounter Piglet, who overslept, as one does, and missed the school bus. And Piglet's in a little bit of a distress because Piglet's afraid that they'll be late for school. And Little Blue says, no, you won't be late for school. Hop in the flatbed. I will get you to school. I know a shortcut. Right? And so Little Blue and Toad take Piglet on an adventure through the forest, right? Past a squirrel and a chipmunk and an owl and other forest creatures, and gets to school just before the school bus does. Right? And the school bus uses her wipers to clean her windshield and says to Little Blue, "I guess I was wrong. You don't have to be big, and you don't have to be shiny, and you don't have to be yellow, and you don't have to have lots of benches and big windows for you to get kids to school. You were a school bus today, Little Blue." Right? My 3-year-old daughter loves this book to pieces. And as a result, my 3-year-old daughter has a much better understanding of bona fide occupational requirements than a lot of human resources professionals I have met.
I can't wait to see what career she goes into.
Not human resources. I do have friends who are human resources professionals, but that's, yeah, anyway. So I share this story because one of the reasons the duty to accommodate doesn't work, and by the way, there are many, but one of the biggest reasons that duty to accommodate doesn't work, or it fails rather spectacularly, particularly in the context of STEM, particularly in the context of grad students and postdocs and employees in science, technology, engineering, math, healthcare, is because we get the bona fide occupational requirements wrong. We confuse a bona fide occupational requirement with something that's not essential, right? There is also something within the space called an asset requirement, and the asset requirement is a thing that we use to screen candidates. So if you have equally qualified candidates, the asset requirement is often the thing that flips you from one candidate to the next, right? And the funny thing is, there's lots of fun ways that people can write these asset requirements or write the job tasks to, number one, make the bona fide occupational requirement not at all easy to interpret. And number two, actually be quite confusing about what is or isn't essential, what is or isn't required. And so things that aren't required get thought of as being required, which is where things like the Mioran test that we talked about in the last video come in. But then things that are required also get written as if they're not actually required, right? And that's where confusion enters, because what ends up happening then is when we think about accessibility supports and we think about calibrating accessibility supports for the person with disabilities, we're thinking about calibrating those accessibility supports in the context of what's actually required to do your job. And if what's required to do your job is confusing and not clear, then you can't calibrate the accessibility support effectively, right? And so, not to belabor the point, but there's any number of human resources professionals that I've talked to who know neither the Mioran test nor how to figure out what a bona fide occupational requirement is, right? And the problem is that's their job, and so they should actually know how to do that. I'll tell you, just anecdotally, I'll tell you an interesting story. I'm teaching for a university in the Greater Toronto area this term, ironically, a course called Accessible by Design Workplaces. And I didn't get my contract until 2 weeks ago. And the contract came to me as a portable document format file that I couldn't read. And so I said, can I get this in a format that I can read so I can actually sign it? And this request got kicked up to human resources, and the email I got from human resources was, are you declaring that you need disability related accommodations to do your job? And I had a phone call with them earlier today where I basically said, I need to sign a contract so I can get paid, right? I don't need disability related accommodations if I can read the piece of paper. If I can't read the piece of paper, then I can't sign a contract. And so why is this so hard? It's so hard because in many ways, what we also do is we also take this set of rules around what's called duty to accommodate, which is a legal framework and a human rights framework, and we apply it everywhere. Historically, a lot of this comes down to a lot of it comes down to sort of the ancestral things that led to workers' safety, right? That led to workers' compensation, that led to this notion of risk frameworks in the workplace around disability. And so pre-industrial revolution, and pre the manufacturing assembly line and pre-unions, right? A worker getting injured in the workplace meant the worker was no longer working. And so because of unions and industrial revolution and manufacturing assembly lines, particularly, once we started building things like cars, right? We got into this space where it was easy to actually get hurt on the assembly line. But this was at the same time that, by and large, if you were like me and you were born with a lived experience with a disability, you were going to be institutionalized. You weren't actually going to be kept at home. And so persons with lived experience with disability from birth were getting put in group homes and institutionalized and undergoing forced sterilization. Thank you, North American eugenics programs of the early 1900s. And somebody who was injured at work was going to go through the ancestor of what is today the duty to accommodate process, right? And so where this whole human rights framework came from was this notion that you were injured at work and you took time off to recover from the injury, and then you had to come back to work, and your job was to produce a certain number of widgets per hour, and your efficiency rating was number of widgets per hour. And when you were off, you were doing 0 widgets per hour, and the workplace wanted to get you back to X widgets per hour and build you back up on a slope to get you from 0 to X in a certain amount of time, right? And it was think of it as a fun calculus problem. And the whole point was to get you from 0 to X as quickly as possible, while making sure that risk to the organization of re-aggravating your injury was going to be minimal, right? And so the whole thing around disability in the workplace started more than 100 years ago in the context of manufacturing and in the context of workplace injury and in the context of risk mitigation. But, and I challenge anybody to actually go do this, go read your institutional disability management policies that exist, the ones that govern how accessibility supports are provided either to students or to employees, right? What you will find is that the language in there assumes that you have taken time off because of your disability and you are now coming back to work, right? And so it's all about getting you up to whatever base level of productivity you had before. And because all of us in the STEM space, particularly in the graduate and postdoctoral realms, we're kind of all in the knowledge economy, right? And so how the knowledge economy works is very different from how manufacturing works. Nobody counts the number of Nature papers we publish per hour, right? I mean,
the number would be very low.
The answer is 0, right? Because a single postdoc might publish X number of publications over the course of 6 years, but that doesn't mean they're spitting out a Nature paper an hour, right? And so the way that things get measured is very different in STEM than it is in, say, manufacturing, right? Which is a subset of STEM, but not the knowledge economy side of STEM, right? And so because of these and frankly many other reasons, what we have is a scenario where you ask, why does it go wrong? It goes wrong because when we think about disability in the workplace, we're not thinking about the world as it is today. We're thinking about the world as it was in the 1920s.
So we need to update the processes and the rules.
Update is not the word I would actually use. I think they need to be reimagined for the reality that we have today. And the reality that we have today is a reality where, yes, you can have a workplace injury, but it is actually much more likely that you will have somebody who comes into their lived experience not because of an injury, but because they were born into that lived experience, or they grew into it early in their educational journeys, right? Because like I'm talking about graduate students here, so we're not gonna have the 55-year-old graduate student who is experiencing diabetes, and so they've got neuropathy, nephropathy, and retinopathy going on all at the same time. I mean, yes, there are graduate students who are 55 because that's when they've decided to go to graduate school, but 99% of graduate students are not that group of human beings, right? And so if you are thinking about a graduate student with a disability, then you are more than likely thinking about somebody who has acquired that lived experience prior to young adulthood, right? And so but the rules that exist are predicated on illness, injury, or accident, right? And so those two scenarios don't always line up, and as a result, the rules that we have are not necessarily the rules that would work for the lived experiences that are at play today.
So when you say rules, are we talking about each institution needs to revisit and reimagine the rules, or is it higher than an institution? So it's like a location, like a state, or is it higher than that and it needs to be kicked up to a country? Like where are the rules?
So there's a concatenation of rules, and I think it should start at the institutional level to imagine how to do things differently and better. And I think from that level, it needs to go up to whoever has control of the human rights systems, whether that's at the state level or is that at a federal level. In Canada, you have both provincial human rights and federal human rights, and the federal human rights are responsible for things that the federal government is responsible for. Provincial human rights tribunals are responsible for everything else, right? So depending on sort of what the local sort of legislative and human rights chain is that the organizations will work in. Like, you can work in the existing human rights frameworks and still change your institutional rules, right? And I think what it actually takes is one institution to say we're going to do it differently, right? For example, for a long time, all of the student accessibility support provisions in most Canadian post-secondary institutions was actually based on, well, you need to have medical documentation. But then there was one school in Quebec about 10 years ago, I'm going to say, that basically said, no, we're going to transform how we do this. We're going to stop doing the whole medical documentation thing, and we're going to start thinking about accessibility supports through the lens of the social model of disability, not the medical model, right? So then it all became about the removal of barriers as opposed to the accommodation of a disability, right? And I mean, an experiment like that is now, say, 10 years in the running, but those kinds of experiments can get short-circuited if somebody leaves and the impetus to do it goes away. And so in reality, I think the unit of the institution needs to put its lawyers in a room and lock them there for a moment and have a conversation, then bring them back in and say, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, and I obviously think the size of the institution may help or hinder. So if you're a smaller institution, you may be able to make change relatively quickly,
Yes.
versus if you're a massive,
Yep.
like a University of California,
Yeah.
I forget, either 14, I'm going to get this wrong. There's lots of different campuses for the number of UCs that we have. And so that would have to go up to a much higher level. Like, I don't think
yes.
one school would be able to make a decision without it affecting potentially every single other school.
No, and in the context of the University of California system, no, because the UC system is a statewide system, and there's a single board of governors that oversees the entirety of the University of California system. Is what I remember correctly, and I say that because the University of Toronto often points to the UC system as, I mean, we're only 3 campuses, but that's what we want to do, like what the folks in California are doing, and so it's, you're correct, like that would be a very difficult system to move. But for example, you know, a single university that didn't have multiple campuses or you know, wasn't sort of separated into you know, 15 different faculties might have an easier time of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So but the flip side of that is those larger institutions actually have the resources to make it stick. Right? And they also have the clout to make it stick, and somebody might believe something coming out of the UC system more than they, okay, so the UC system might have an easier time of something than, say, the City University of New York. Right? Yeah. Because CUNY is much smaller and much less complicated, also much less complex, but also doesn't have the cachet or the clout that, say, a UC does.
So what I'm hearing is that in an ideal situation, all of these institutions would revisit / reimagine the rules. But if we could get a large one or many of them to do it at the same time, so we have a precedent to encourage other universities and institutions to also adapt, that would be best. Is that
sure.
What I'm...
I mean, say, take what I just used as an example, right? So you know, the University of Texas isn't going to look at the City University of New York as a role model. Mm-hmm. They might more look at the University of California as a role model, right? Or you know, Florida State isn't going to look at, what's another good example? Florida State isn't going to look at MD Anderson, right? It's going to look at something that's comparable, another statewide university system like, say, Michigan, right? Mm-hmm. And so you know, I think what we need to appreciate in thinking about how accessibility supports are working for grad students, for postdocs, for employees within the space that you and I work within, which is sort of the STEM and healthcare space, We have a system that is creaky, that I'm not going to say is broken, because it's actually doing what I think it's supposed to do. The problem is it's doing what it's supposed to do, but not for the people who are within it, who are inside the STEM space, who are the graduate student, postdoc, employee level, who are the early career ones, right? And again, fundamentally, if you are somebody who is 55 years old, who's coming into a lived experience with disability, you're going to think about it very differently than if you are 25 years old and you've actually had that lived experience since you were 5, right? And organizations, institutions need to recognize that. We need to reimagine how we think about our policies, our practices, our structures, our processes, and we need to say, you know what, maybe this isn't going to work for everybody. And so we need to figure out who it's going to work for, who it's not going to work for, and for the folks that it's not going to work for, let's do something different.
Okay, so that was a lot of food for thought. If you work for one of these institutions, I hope that you take some of that message to heart, and maybe you can go and talk to the relevant people to see if you can make change happen for your population. Remember, we do serve the population and we are there for them. So please do everything you can to assist. So thank you, Mahadio. This time, if you saw the last video, you'll have heard me say that the next video is talking about why is DEI or IDEA relevant to science. So we are going to cover it next time. So please join us for that. Please like and subscribe to my channel and Mahadio's over at IDEA STEM, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.